On this history episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we look at the shipping behind D-Day. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So many of you watch What's Going On with Shipping to find out what's going on with commercial shipping around the world on a daily basis. But I am also a maritime historian, and one of my favorite topics to study and discuss is World War II. I'm right now writing a history on American shipping in World War I. My plan is to finish that and then do American shipping in World War II. And shipping is the key linchpin in both world wars, particularly World War II. And this, the 80th anniversary of D-Day, is going to be a huge event. One of the last times we'll probably see large numbers of veterans still around to commemorate it. And you're going to get all the different aspects of D-Day, the landings, the paratroopers, you name it. But one of the things that's not going to be talked about enough, in my opinion, is the crucial role of shipping to provide the sustainment and, most importantly, the logistics to allow the Allies to wage Operation Overlord. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how the Allies got themselves in that position. First, we're going to talk about the Allied success in the Battle of the Atlantic. Second, we're going to talk about the prioritization of Europe over Pacific and what that actually looked like and what it meant. And then third, we're going to look at two key vessels that provided the absolute essential nature for landings and sustainment in Normandy. And that is going to be landing ship tanks, U.S. Navy vessels, and then Liberty ships, commercial vessels. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So if you want background on this beyond this video, I'm going to recommend a couple of sources to you. Number one, Neptune by Craig Symonds. Craig Symonds is a consummate naval historian, one of the best that's out there. He talks about the Allied landings in Normandy, particularly the naval side. I think it's a great book. My only criticism of Neptune is it ends right after the landings. It doesn't go in great depth on the issue of the buildup afterwards. He does talk about it, but not in the detail I kind of like. And also, I think it doesn't cover the commercial aspect quite as much. If you want a good overview of the entire Normandy campaign, and I'm not just talking about the landings on D-Day, but the entire buildup in France to the breakout, then James Holland's Normandy 44. Jim Holland does a great job. I mean, the man is kind of like the Cornelius Ryan and Stephen Ambrose of today. He has a way to really give you a cast of characters, primary sources from people who are there, and most importantly, paint such a picture of the individuals that you know who he's talking about pages later after they talked about him. But a great, and more importantly, he covers the three aspects of the battle. He covers the strategic, the Eisenhower, the Montgomery, the Rommel, the von Rundstedt, covers that. He covers the tactical, the soldier on the ground. And then he, most importantly, covers the operational, which is sometimes missed, which is what is the overall battle plans and how is it going to be done. Then if you really want to get wonky and you want to get into the weeds of stuff, well, then you want to go delve into the Army Green Book series. These are available online, so you can download PDFs from these, and I'll have the links in the show notes. There is a 2-volume set on logistics in Northwest Europe. What's called logistical support of the armies. This covers all the logistics for the U.S. military in Northwest Europe, including the landings at Normandy. And then if you want the global one for that, there's 2 volumes of this. This is Global Logistics and Strategy. This is my Bible when it comes to talking about World War II and global logistics. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the story here. First, we're going to look at how the Allies won the Battle of the Atlantic, because the Battle of the Atlantic was essential. If you've watched Masters of the Air, the third iteration of Band of Brothers in the Pacific, this is the aerial version that's on Apple Plus. It looks at the 100th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force. And one of the things that was really well done in that series, and there's a lot of things well done in that series, but one of the things I liked the most is it really conveyed, end of 43, early 44, how the 8th Air Force and the entire strategic bombing effort, 8th Air Force, the Bomber Command, 15th Air Force down in Italy, were all focused on not just hitting strategic targets in Europe, but also destroying the Luftwaffe so that the Allies would have air dominance over France. Well, in much the same way, the Battle of the Atlantic is necessary so that the Allies could win dominance over the Germans and ensure an open supply line from the United States to Europe. So this chart shows you the principal convoys going across the Atlantic. This is the principal North Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic convoys coming across. Now, the stereotypical view of the Battle of the Atlantic is German U-boats ran amok, sinking ships all the time, and it really wasn't until mid-1943 through the breaking of German codes, the Enigma machine, and new technologies that the Allies introduced that you saw the change in the U-boat war. And that is not exactly accurate. One of the things that becomes overly clear is that convoys were very successful. If you look at these numbers, you get to see exactly what I'm talking about. The convoys here are able to get across. Early in 1942, for example, you're seeing a series of convoys coming through. You have 253 convoys, almost 8,000 ships, and out of them sunk in convoys just 127 ships. In 1943, you're up to almost 300 convoys, 12,500 ships, and 126 ships sunk. And then in 1944, 380 convoys, 18,856. You're averaging 50 ships in a convoy, over 3,000 escorts. Each convoy has 8 escorts, and you only lose 15 ships. And convoys became not just defensive weapons, but offensive weapons. And that is a key in understanding the Battle of the Atlantic. So I pulled these charts from U-Boat.net, online source, absolutely fantastic. And I pulled them for just a couple of key months, and they show you where sinkings were done by U-boats. So in June of 1940, during that first kind of happy time, you'll see sinkings are right there in the eastern Atlantic, right in the western approaches coming into Great Britain. This is a period of time when the British did not have enough escorts for their convoys. They were convoying, but they didn't have enough. And unlike World War I, where a convoy may encounter one submarine on its approach, it can peel off a series of its escorts, keep those submarines pinned down while the convoy sails on. It's different in World War II because the U-boats are coming in packs at this time, plus the U-boats, the Type 7C, are much faster than the German World War I U-boats, meaning that if you push that 7C down to the bottom, it can pop back up, speed ahead of the convoy, get out in front of it. Plus, if you peel off escorts to keep one submarine down, other submarines are coming in to attack. And so the convoys and wolf packs are a big problem. Go ahead, fast forward to June of 41. You see that the U-boats shift their focus. They move out of the western approaches. They're out in the mid-Atlantic. They're in the air gap, that area where there's no air coverage. And one of the things you will see throughout the war is U-boats go to where the easiest pickings are. There's a reason they're called wolf packs. They're not always going to go and hit the heavily defended area. Fast forward to June of 42. This is the end of Operation Drumbeat. This is the German U-boat offensive against North America, off the coast of Canada, the eastern seaboard, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see how the German U-boats go into those areas where there's no convoys. They just absolutely just slaughter ships there because most of the escorts are on those North Atlantic convoys. And you can see there's only a few sinkings there that are taking place. And then you get to the pivotal period, which is May of 43, where you see a series of convoy battles. And those convoy battles are epic in scale. And while there are some sinkings, the Germans are losing U-boats at a large number. If you look over here at U-Boat.net, they have here famous convoy battles. And what's really interesting is you tend to think that convoy battles were the norm, but they were really the exception. You really don't see a lot of large major convoy battles. But what's interesting here is if you look, for example, in 1942, and there are a lot of convoy battles, you can see that the Germans are deploying anywhere, just into the double digits of U-boats and getting sinkings. But if you go into 1943, they're deploying in some cases up to 40, 50 U-boats in convoy attacks. And they are not getting more sinkings for them. And as a matter of fact, the last big convoy battle you have is in 1944. It's one of the Murmansk convoys, JW-56A, where there is a convoy battle. So you are losing those convoy battles. The Allies are winning. It has a lot to do with the deployment of more resources to battle. I mean, there's a point when the Allies are convoying not just across the North Atlantic, but the Mid-Atlantic, but the Mediterranean, the South Atlantic. Every ship is actually under convoy. There's a lot of arguments that the Allies overproduce escort vessels, but in truth, What it did is the U-boats kept shifting over. So if you look at May of 1944, just the month before D-Day, U-boats are not very successful. Where are they being successful? There's a couple of sinkings in the South Atlantic, some in the Med, some in the Black Sea, but largely the North Atlantic has become a pond for the United States and Great Britain to be able to haul goods directly across from the U.S. to the British Isles and eventually directly to the beaches in Normandy and later on southern France. Add to it, the Allies aren't just defeating U-boats and getting convoys across, but the Allied shipbuilding program has taken off, principally the U.S. under the Maritime Commission. A program started in 1936 to build 500 ships over 10 years has been magnified with the construction of Liberty ships. Over 2,700 are going to be built. Over 500 T2 tankers are going to be built, and then you're going to transition into Victory ships. And you'll see late in 1942, the Allies actually start outproducing the ships they're losing, and by the time you get to 1943, it just increases wholesale. Now, one of the big debates that happens here in 1942 and the 43 is what type of ships are you going to build? Are you going to build landing craft? Are you going to build commercial ships? And remember, the Allies have to defend multiple fronts here. In June of 1944, the Allies aren't just on the offensive in Northwest Europe. The Russians are launching Operation Bagration, the largest offensive operation in history up to that point. A lot of that is being sustained by Lend-Lease cargo coming across the Arctic and through the Middle East, across Iran, Persia at the time. The Allies are storming up the Italian peninsula. They're going to liberate Rome on June 4th. Over in the Pacific, the Allies are preparing, the U.S. is preparing to land in the Marianas for the landings on Saipan to stage the B-29s, which are currently then flying out of bases in China over the hump. And the 14th Army in India is fighting at Imphal. So you have multiple operations undergoing at the same time. You have to sustain all those with shipping, not the least of which civilian populations on top of that. So the construction of these ships are absolutely essential. This goes then to the priority. Where is the priority in World War II for the U.S.? This chart comes out of that global logistics book from the U.S. Army, and it shows you Army troops overseas and cargo shipments from Army ports going to either Germany and Italy, that is the light colored bar on top, or the shaded bar, which is Japan. And initially, Army troops are being focused and sent over against Japan initially. That's the focus. You have to hold that key area of the Hawaiian Islands, Alaska, and Australia. So U.S. Army troops are being dumped out there in large numbers. 32nd and 41st Infantry Division is going to Australia. 37th Infantry is going to Fiji. Reinforcements are heading into Hawaii. And really, there's a minimal reinforcements heading to Europe at the time. That changes with the decision to go into North Africa. However, supplies are much different, with more being sent into Europe because of the need to sustain and start building up the plans for the invasion of Northwest Europe. This shows you the flow of those Army troops in overseas, and you can see how it starts taking over here, where the war in Europe about mid-1942 eclipses the war against Japan. You have the initial movements, what's called the Bolero movements. That's the buildup into Europe, into England at the time, but then the diversions into North Africa and then the Mediterranean, whereas you're seeing kind of steady progression of buildup of forces heading over to the Southwest Pacific for General MacArthur and for Admiral Halsey in the Guadalcanal offensive. And not just troops overseas, but we also see the same thing here with the movement of cargo, where we start seeing the big spikes in cargo heading to Europe in about mid to late 1942. That gets us to the landings in Normandy. And this photo, which I used as the thumbnail for this, is one of my favorite photographs of the invasion of Normandy. This is Omaha Beach, obviously after the landing. And what you take the time to peel this picture apart, there's some really interesting things you see here. So to the left side, you see a series of small landing craft that are beached. The tide at Omaha Beach ranged between 17 to 25 feet. There's a huge tide in the English Channel. And what you see here is the effort to offload vessels. And there's two ways they're offloading vessels here. You have the small landing craft that are beached, but what you tend to see in the center part of that picture, from the left side to the right side, are landing ship tanks, LSTs. They are high and dry up on the beach. Now, you're not supposed to do this with LSTs. You're never supposed to take a ship and completely beach it. An LST was designed to put its nose onto the beach, offload it, and then peel back off. But because of the range of tides at Normandy, the decision was made to bring them in and beach them entirely. Now, LSTs are really unique. I'm going to come back to them. But behind the LSTs, kind of in the background there, are a whole slew of different ships, but included among them are Liberty ships. And these are traditional cargo ships that were built during World War II. The very first one is the SS Patrick Henry that's built in September of 1941, and then it's followed again by about 2,700 of them being built. So you have 2,700 LSTs, you have 2,700 Liberty ships and about 1,000 LSTs that are built. An LST can carry about a fifth of what a Liberty ship can carry. LSTs carry about 2,000 tons of cargo. Liberty ships carry about 10,000 tons of cargo. But what you see here is LSTs beached, discharging their cargo, basically rolling cargo, trucks and tanks and other craft. Meanwhile, the Liberty ships are out at anchor, offloading into small boats for offload ashore. So you have two different styles of operations going on here. This is the famous Mulberry ports, and two of these were constructed, one off Omaha Beach, one off the British beaches at Arakmis. And the Mulberries were very innovative ports. You understand, Allied landings in Europe in World War II up to this point had been much different. In 1942, when the Allies landed in North Africa, they seized ports. They seized Casablanca, Oran, Algiers. They don't land directly in the ports, although there are some landings there. But they land around the ports and seize the ports. Even in Sicily, they seized the port of Syracuse, and then later on Palermo and Messina. In Salerno in southern Italy, they grabbed Naples. They grabbed the port of Taranto. And then you have the landing in January of 1944 at Anzio. And I think Anzio is one of the most misunderstood operations. Because Anzio, because the operation isn't quite as successful, they don't get the breakout early on out of it, they have to supply the Sixth Corps over the beach. And so the Allies learned how to really do this over the beach without ports. In the Pacific, you had the same thing, but nowhere near on the scale that you're seeing at Normandy. And so the plan is made to build these artificial ports. And these artificial ports are very elaborate. You'll see here closest to the bottom of the picture a series of breakwaters. You're creating a area of calm water. You need flat water to be able to offload. Then you see a series of Liberty ships at moorings tied up. They're not at anchor, they're not swinging, they're tied up so that you have a stable platform and you can bring more ships in. If you have ships at anchor, you have to have huge anchor circles where the ships can swing. And then you see these piers that they built that run to shore. Remember that big, huge tide I talked about? You don't want to be beaching all the time. You want to be able to offload to a wharf and then drive that cargo down the pier, kind of like what you're trying to see now happen in Gaza with the U.S. Evolution. And you even see a tank landing ship pier head where you can bring your LSTs in, put the ramp down, and then drive the cargo ashore. This is obviously the preferred method, but what happens is the Mulberry at Omaha is largely destroyed because of a storm, and they shift over to the British Mulberry, but the Allies still will come across the beach in Omaha and still keep using it, hence the picture before. So this is your landing ship tank. Again, very innovative vessel. Now, not a fast vessel. It's a slow vessel, but so is a Liberty ship. Both of them really are looking at probably about 10, 11 knots. So not very fast. Liberty ship had two decks. You had the internal deck inside the vessel, and then you had the top deck. the weather deck, and it was connected either by an elevator or a ramp. Ramp was the preferred method. The elevators were always a little bit flaky at times. But the LSTs were designed with a very elaborate ballast system and a ventilation system that allowed you, for example, to start vehicles in the hold and not kill everybody with carbon monoxide. And what made LSTs unique was you can run them up on the beach and offload them in a very brief period of time. So at Normandy, you can basically take your LST, come ashore at high tide, the tide's going to pull out, and within the 12-hour window that tide exists, you can offload the entire LST. And then you can pull it off the beach and go back to England and reload again and come ashore. This is a fantastic quick method you can use. You can use LSTs for these quick methods. Now, you're dumping 2,000 tons of cargo in 12 hours. However, you have to sail back, go get more, and bring it back. And you're limited by the tide and that window. Liberty ships are much larger. They carry about 5 times the cargo of an LST. Now, what makes a Liberty ship much more interesting for me is that it is a transoceanic vessel. You can sail an LST across the Atlantic, and they do that. But Liberty ships can carry 5 times the cargo, and most importantly, they can go transoceanic, go directly to the United States, load up a cargo, and then come directly to the beaches off of Omaha, off of the British beaches, or into ports once they're opening. And Liberty ships are really interesting because of the amount of cargo you can carry. This is SS Patrick Henry. This is actually a load plan for the SS Patrick Henry. And a couple of things to note on this load plan. So, for example, one of the things that makes Liberty ships not ideal in some ways is there were only 2 decks in each hold. So there's 5 holds. There's a hold up forward. There's a number 2 hold between 1 and 3 hold forward of the house. There's a hold just forward of the house. Right below the house in the middle is the engine room. And then there are 2 holds back aft. So if you look to the left side there, you'll see M4 Sherman tanks. M4 Sherman tanks are designed to go on ships. They are square and boxy for a reason. The reason your 75mm cannon doesn't go over the front of the tank is so that it can pack inside the hold of a vessel. And the only hold you can put them in on a Liberty ship is the number 2 hold, because the number 2 hold has a 30-ton boom, and M4 tanks weigh 30 tons. And so you can stack your tanks in there. Below that top deck of the holds, what's called the tween deck, or the between deck, you have the lower hold. Now, Liberty ships lack another kind of deck down there. This is one of the drawbacks of them. But what they would typically do is load the lower hold full of cargo and then load things on top of it. So if you look at hold number 4, just to the right of the midship house, you'll see they've loaded Stewart tanks, M5 tanks on there. They're actually loaded on top of cargo. And you can pack a Liberty ship to the gills. You can pack it very efficiently. The problem you have on an LST is because you're rolling cargo on and off, there's a lot of open space, what's called broken stowage. You're not filling the ship up to the gunnels. In other words, not every space is filled on board. The LSTs allow you to offload quickly because you can drive everything off. A Liberty ship allows you to fill it up to its marks, basically, take a cargo hold and block and brace it and fill it with everything, and then you can offload it. And because Liberty ships had its own booms and cranes, they can offload at anchor. So you can bring landing craft, ducks, these amphibious trucks alongside. And think about that for a minute. If you have a 2.5-ton duck comes alongside to offload a 10,000-ton Liberty ship, it's going to take you 4,000 moves to get that ship offloaded. So you either need 4,000 ducks, or more importantly, you need to have a slew of small boat craft available to do it. But the key thing you get here is throughput. You can start funneling a lot of cargo through. So the LSTs and the Liberty ships are absolutely essential for doing. Now, there's other ships besides Liberty ships. There are C1, C2, C3 freighters. There are British freighters. There are Allied freighters. But the Liberty ship is a good kind of overall example here because many of the cargo ships of the 1940s follow this standard. And that gets you to the throughput now on the beaches. So that when you look at this, this is the troop buildup in Europe from June of 1942 to May of 1942. And you can see the number of personnel coming in. And early in 1943, there's not a lot of troops coming in to Great Britain at the time. They're being diverted. They're heading either to North Africa or they're heading into the Pacific. And so you don't have large troop convoys bringing in a lot of troops into the area. It's only about mid-1943, and again, that coincides with the defeat of the U-boats, that you start seeing the really large troop convoys coming in. And it's toward the end of 43 to 44 that England starts to be weighted down with the arrival of troops. This is also matched with tonnage and cargo coming ashore. Then you look at this. This is the landing over the beach. And this is courtesy of Craig Symonds' book, Neptune. He compiled this chart. He actually took the data out of the green books and kind of put it together in a great little kind of format here. So you see landing of personnel, you see vehicles, and then you see stores in tons. And he breaks it down into the periods. So the first one is the initial landings, and the initial landings are largely by small landing craft over the beach. Now, this is at Omaha Beach for the Americans. And you'll see from June 6th to June 11th, you're really starting to get small, tonnage and buildup there. The key point in the landings, I would argue, is not June 6th. June 6th is obviously the most dramatic. It's the one that gets the most attention. But the Germans are able to throw a lot of forces at the Allies very quickly. They have 10 mobile divisions that they can move and respond. And we all know that Hitler sleeps in and he doesn't get the panzers moving quick, but they do start moving fairly quick. And the counterattacks are going to be fierce, particularly in the British sector, which is the closest to those. But over at Normandy and over at Omaha, you start seeing the buildup. So from June 12th to 16th, you get those images like the picture in the background with the LSTs coming in. You start seeing the personnel come, but the big thing is those stores. You're getting about 8,000 tons a day that are offloading. That's about 4 LSTs, 4 full LSTs a day that are coming in and offloading. Now, you're probably not getting 2,000 tons on each LST because you're driving everything off, but you're seeing a lot. And if you start looking at those vehicles, it starts coming in. You see with the Mulberries coming in, now all of a sudden that tonnage begins to increase. And now you're starting to get a little bit more as you're getting LSTs or transitioning over to cargo ships. Then the storm comes in, and the storm is what wrecks everything. And you see a big drop in the amount of cargo coming ashore. This is obviously crucial because the Allies not being able to get supplies is a weak point for them. If they can't land over the beach, that's going to be a problem. But after the storm, even with the destruction of the Mulberry at Omaha, the Allies decide to go in full force. They're going to continue beaching LSTs while at the same time using the breakwater that they've set up. They've lost the piers that came ashore, as you saw in the earlier image, but they're going to put their Liberty ships inside the breakwater, use landing craft, and just shuttle cargo ashore. So that by the time you get to the end of June, June 24th to the 30th, you're averaging over 13,000 tons of cargo ashore a day. And this is what is allowing you to do the buildup into Normandy. And that is the key. If you do not have the buildup into Normandy, then you cannot stage forces and maintain what you need to do the eventual breakout. There are tons of books written about this period that look at this and really, I would argue, don't look at the logistics and don't understand that you need that area behind Utah and Omaha Beach and behind Gold, Sword, and Juneau for these massive logistics bases. One of the things is they are behind in deploying troops ashore. Divisions are supposed to be coming ashore in a set pattern, but they're not coming ashore because they can't be sustained, and that is crucial. The Allies, particularly the Americans, are doing this. So one of the things you see, for example, in the American sector is Hitler gives the order to hold Cherbourg, Fortress Cherbourg, to commit forces to hold the fortress, because he believes the Allies need Cherbourg for the port. Well, in truth, they don't. they are getting supplies across the beaches and through the Mulberries. If Hitler had known about the Mulberries and looked more closely at what was going on in Anzio, he may have not committed his forces to hold Cherbourg. Could have destroyed the harbor, just done the demolition, and not lose all those forces and shifted them south so that they were on line to help contain the Americans on the west side of the lodgment. The British are dealing with massive amounts of counterattacks by German panzer forces. The largest concentration of tanks in the entire war and divisions is right there in front of Caen. I know Montgomery gets a lot of flack, General Dempsey gets a lot of flack, but understand that's key. They have got to hold that area so that the supplies behind the beaches are building up and they can get that lodgment fully established and then execute the breakout. And the two vessels that are essential to this are the 1,000 landing ship tanks that are built during World War II and the 2,700 Liberty ships that are built. Each of them are unique in their ability to deliver cargo, and both of them are going to be essential for doing it. The one thing I haven't talked about, which is also key, is fuel oil. When the LSTs and Liberty ships come, they're offloading oil, largely in jerry cans, big 5-gallon cans. But in the meantime, the Allies are laying a pipeline, a 3-inch diameter pipeline known as PLUTO, the petroleum line under the ocean, that is going to come ashore and be hooked into a pipeline system ashore they're developing so that fuel oil can be delivered. One of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that the Allies, up to the last minute, are sending huge convoys across. This is from Arnold Haig's convoy database. This is convoy HX292. It leaves New York City on 19 May 1944. It arrives in Liverpool on 2 June 1944. It contains 132 ships and 27 escorts. That is a massive convoy. This convoy gets in just as Normandy is prepared to happen. This is going on all the time. Every few days, we're seeing convoys that size come in delivering cargo. There are LSTs in this convoy that are going to be sent down to the English Channel. There are tankers, there's cargo ships, there's reinforcements coming across. These are the massive convoys that are coming across. And once you get that lodgment, once you start opening up ports, in Europe, you've got Mulberry's, you get Cherbourg. Later on, you'll get Marseille with Anvil. You'll get ports along the Atlantic coast. Eventually, you get Antwerp, but you got to clear the Scheldt, which takes a while. But once you can start bringing ships directly from the U.S. into Europe, you can bypass England, but you still have that huge stockpile in England. That's got to be shuttled across. Those are those LSTs, bringing them across, along with coasters and a myriad of vessels that are going to provide the necessary sustainment for them. Commercial shipping, U.S. Navy, Royal Navy, Allied navies, merchant mariners, both British and American, are just key for this. One of my favorite figures that comes out of this is the founders of what is modern-day Moran towing. The U.S. Naval Institute has a great oral history of Rear Admiral Edmund Moran. Moran towing, which we just saw in operation in Baltimore, helping remove the motor vessel Dolly. Edmund Moran was put in charge of the tugboat fleet that's going to tow across the English Channel the caissons and elements of the Mulberries. Moran was a Navy reservist. He operated Moran towing back in the United States, and him and his fleet of tugboats, both U.S. Navy and commercial tugboats, will brave the fire of Normandy to tow across these caissons, put them into position to create the breakwater and later on the piers. So there is a lot of detail about shipping behind the scenes that I think are just essential to understand the success that is the landing at Normandy back in June of 1944. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. And once again, my big salute to all the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and mariners who took part 80 years ago in this operation to liberate Europe, land Allied forces in Normandy, and kick off the final phase that eventually, in conjunction with the Soviets, leads to the destruction of Nazi Germany and the end of World War II in Europe. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.